Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? I decided, even though I wasn't quite finished tweaking my latest improved version of D&D, that I'd go ahead and start talking about it because maybe that'll give me the kick in the butt I need to finish up some details. Mostly just spell descriptions because that was a big pain in the butt because there's just a lot of spells and I, kind of adjusted a few of them for time, and I'll get into that at some point. But really, what I wanted to talk about a little bit is just where I'm coming from in terms of my D&D perspective, and give you a little history. This might be boring to some people, and some people might find it interesting. I don't know, but yeah, I figured it'd be interesting to talk about, at least for me. Anyhow, I kind of got into the genre of like fantasy and science fiction through my dad, who kind of introduced me, not only to real science but to science fiction and fantasy at an early age. He had me watching Star Trek by age 3 or something, and at age 5, he gave me The Hobbit to read, and then The Lord of the Rings. So I'd read all those by the time I was 7 or so, and read Narnia and all that kind of stuff. So really got into the whole genre, and I think he got me a membership to the science fiction book club by the time I was about 10. Now I hadn't started playing D&D, when it came out in '74 because I was 6 years old, so a little too young, and I hadn't been exposed to it. But I started seeing the ads for it in comic books and what have you, and I had a couple of friends that I knew played. And in 1981, I got the basic set, which is the first of the BX series, the basic set and the expert set. And for those of you in the know, that's the Mulvey Cook Marsh version of D&D, later replaced by the Mensa version of basic, which is like BCMI. And I just loved it instantly. It was easy to understand. I was DMing and running my own games like within a few days. I'd grab any kids I could to sit down and play, and adults and whatever. And so it was fun, and it was easy to understand. And I'm kind of kicking myself for not buying the expert set, and that's one of my things I have to go buy in hard copy. I own PDFs and most stuff, because my friends are like, "Hey, you really want to play AD&D?" I'm like, "Okay." So I went out and I bought the 3 core books of Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, which is now known as First Edition, and I also loved that. It took me a little longer to, maybe about a weekend or so before I really kind of got the whole thing, and I was hooked. I thought this was a great game, and I played that for a good long time. I tried to get into some of the other games in the genre, and they never really stuck. I never really, found a science fiction one or anything like that that really floated my boat. And it wasn't that I was just a fantasy person, because I'd prefer to read science fiction and not so much fantasy, but just for a gaming purpose. D&D in the fantasy world kind of hit what I was after, and I enjoyed that. And so I played other role-playing games, but never quite enjoyed them as much in terms of setting and what have you. Then I took a real big break from D&D because I got married, had kids, kind of had a life. And sort of put the books on the shelves and would look at them from time to time, but really didn't play for a good long time. So I missed second edition. I was playing when second edition came out, but I figured, hey, I have the books, why should I buy them again? And completely missed third edition, and then really only started playing like D20 when a friend asked me to play in his Pathfinder game, and that was my first introduction to D20 and that whole third edition mechanics. And then, of course, fourth edition came out, and I looked at that, and I played some Gamma World based on that. But more like looked over the whole rules and watched people play the game. And just playing in the D20 game, while I think Pathfinder is a great product, it just didn't do it for me. At that point, I realized that my God, there's like so many rules involved, and it becomes so much of a technical exercise that it stopped feeling like the game. And I don't mean to bash anybody's favorite edition, and with fourth edition, the same thing. It was in a different direction, but it really just didn't feel like D&D to me. Whereas there's myriads of versions of first and second edition, and the various basics, and a lot of the retro clones and half clones and what have you, that kind of use the framework of in many cases, a simpler rule set, or the first edition, which is complex, no doubt about it. But for me, those kind of do what I want the game to do, and it's not just nostalgia, because with those games, even with first edition, you can throw out 75% of the rules, and it still plays like like D&D. So that's kind of like my history with the game, and what kind of hits the sweet spot for me. As I started looking at the game, as an adult, I realized that I don't have to. I don't have to play the rules as written. I don't have to be by the book. Nobody's going to come to my house and arrest me. There are no RPG police that will lock you up and put you in jail if you do some extensive house ruling. We always used to do house rules, and we used to, scurry to the mailboxes or the newsstands to get the latest edition of Dragon magazine. Say, isn't this a cool idea? Or is this a cool rule? But when I looked at second edition, I said, wow, there's a lot more rules in this too, especially with all the splat stuff. I realized where all those rules came from. They came from all those Dragon magazines and all these rules we thought were nifty. And every single one of those rules and idea by itself was pretty neat, but you put them all together and the game became this huge, unwieldy monster. And trying to base my homebrew more on first edition rather than something like basic, like BX, worked okay, but I realized after I did it and play tested it was still kind of an unwieldy monster. And I became more and more enamored with the old, or simpler, because BX actually postdates first edition, the simpler version of BX as kind of a platform. And I like a lot of the first edition rules and some tables and stuff, so I use those when I like them. And I also was really impressed with Lamentations of the Flame Princess, which is admittedly very based on BX D&D, with some first edition stuff thrown in, especially with the spells. And then with a lot of his house rules, and a lot of them I kicked myself and said, wow, that's a really simple rule, but I do just a little differently, but take his idea. And so that's kind of where I'm coming from. I like a game to be simple and playable. I don't think it needs a ton of rules to be fun and to be fair. And I've talked about that in the past. So that's kind of where I'm coming from in terms of D&D. So hopefully that gives you a little bit more perspective of where I'm coming from when I'm talking about my rules and what I like and why I make the decisions that I do.